Hi and welcome to part 2 of my French cinema season. And we're into the 40s now, and we're going to look at a Jules Duvivier film called Panique. When trying to put this season of films together, I tried to think of sequencing and thinking of themes that carry over from one on to the next film. And while Le Grand Illusion is a film about the First World War and about the camaraderie and togetherness and looking at differences of class and the differences between people in the First World War and what was known as much more of a friendly war, I thought by the time we got to the 1940s, it might be nice to look at some of the themes and fallout of things that happened from the Second World War. Because the Second World War wasn't a friendly war at all. It was very much born out of division and nationalism and fascism and all of those horrible parts of society that ultimately ended up in genocide. And I wanted to do this in a film that didn't really touch on those exact things quite so directly. So like a very on the nose World War II film from around 1940, which there are some of, but I wanted to avoid that. So what we have is Panique. And Panique tells a story of ostensibly a man called Monsieur Ire, who is a bit of a loner, he's a bit of an outcast, a bit of a social outcast, and he is very much in the fringes of a society in this very small French town village that he lives in. Pretty much at the very start of the movie, there is a murder that happens within the village itself. The camera pans back from a foot and pans out, and you basically see one half of a dead body of a lady who's been murdered. Now, in the background of this, there are some other fringe characters in it. There's the people of the town, but there are other two main characters. One is a female who's just arrived in town, having been released from prison. And then her lover, the suave, charming type, who it becomes quite clear that she covered for to go to prison and meet up outside, but she's still completely infatuated by him as a person. And they set about trying to build their new life together. But it doesn't a spoiler to say that Monsieur Ire is going to be framed for the murder of this woman. And he's an easy person to frame because he's not well liked in town. Not because he's rude or abrupt, although he is sometimes that kind of stuff, but he doesn't intend to be. It's just because he's very much in keeping with his own company. He likes just being by himself. He likes being on the fringes of society, so he becomes an easy target. And they set him up, this female character played by Vivienne Romance, it's a great name by the way, they set him up as basically the patsy. Using her feminine wiles or her charms, she lures him in and basically shows a darker side of Monsieur Ire, in that he's a bit of a voyeur. He looks out his window at night and it overlooks the young lady's apartment where she's undressed, and he cannot help but catch himself looking at her and staring at her. And while it's uncomfortable to look at, it's something that she's very aware of and uses it to her advantage to lure him in, to bring out this provocative side, to do things for her in the promise of some relationship that's coming or otherwise. There's that side of it which is very much the strong female-led femme fatale part that I'm talking about, and then there's the other side of it. This again is not a new facet of cinema or a new theme explored in cinema, and it's the idea of letting the mob take control and look for justice, looking to see how, if we can influence the mob, everything else kind of falls into place for you. Like I say, not a new idea in cinema. Metropolis has the idea of the mob. There are many, many examples of this throughout cinema. And the film looks very much at these themes of convincing the mob to then go for mob justice. The hell with police work and investigation. You only need the suggestion that somebody is guilty and people to look at those characters that there are. And there's a couple of things that pop out of this that obviously Duvivier was quite aware of. And that is the fact that the outsider, the loner type, is easy to point the finger at. as is often the case, the real darkness in society are the sociopaths, the people that are suave, charming, or otherwise. They are the people that manipulate people, or the people pass off as being good because of their warm or so-called warm nature. And this isn't often the case. You even need to think about all of the times when, you know, there has been a serial killer outed and they go in and talk to the neighbours, and lo and behold, God, we had no idea. It was lovely. He looked after his mother a lot, etc. That seemed to fall into place. The other part about this is pretty much, you know, looking at its place in time. It did say that this referred to the Second World War, the fallout of the Second World War. And as it turned out, this wasn't a very successful movie or very well thought of in his filmography, in Duvivier's filmography. And you've got to look at the reasons why. Well, he was, for all intents and purposes, someone who deserted during the Second World War. He went and moved to Hollywood to make films, not necessarily through choice by all accounts, but because it was just safer for him, and he returned home at the end of it. And because of this, I think there was a distrust of him as a director. He had made some very successful movies before he went, and he came back to make this. And rather than a patriotic film, he came back to make a film that really looked at, you know, all the bad elements of the Second World War, and that is that the mob enabled a lot of the bad things to happen in Europe around that time. And it was seen as very anti-nationalist because there were certain parts of France that were kind of called culpable in some of the horrific atrocities that had happened in the country at that time. And it kind of shone a bit of a light on that. Coupled with that is the fact that Monsieur Ure, from the source novels, apparently is Jewish, but it's only really hinted at that he's of Jewish descent in Panique. And because of that, it also plays into this idea of anti-Semitism from the mob, and that they were trying to sweep him up in the same, and tar him with the same brush. I can see why this was deeply unpopular at the time. It was maybe a bit too raw given the time that it came out, but it's also one of the reasons why it's seen as much more of a classic film these days. Once those initial feelings die away, you're left with something to examine that is, you know, a lot deeper and can be intruded and a lot deeper in with the political themes around that time and the state of the world around that time. So Panique is a wonderful example of this. It has some great filmmaking techniques. There's this idea of the pull-out that seems to happen a lot in the movie, of we go very close into something and then we pull back to show much more of the theme. And it goes in with the idea that Ure was a photographer as well. He liked to see things in broadly. You know, you look at the close-up and pull back and see the bigger picture of things. So it fitted with him as a character, but it also fitted very well in with the theme of the film, in that it's beautifully shot. There's lots of fluid motion, and you definitely get a sense of this small town or village atmosphere that are in there. It's also not one note in its characters, because Ure is obviously, you know, an outsider otherwise, but it's also very clear that he's a deeply intelligent man, that he is a very smart man, and that in some ways him getting dragged into this tryst of this female is something that he probably should know better than, but he can't help himself. We are all slaves to our instincts and our emotions at the end of the day, and they will lead us where they will sometimes, and often lead us to make some poor choices. And aside from that, we have the female character herself, who, as it evolves through the film, her own motivations get questioned. She's, in theory, a bad person who's been in jail, but actually, does she stay evil in her intentions? Is it evil or for her own self at all costs? And these are many of the things that make this film very, very interesting and make it worth exploring. So that is Panique. I encourage you to watch it. I encourage you to take it in. I encourage you to watch it a few times, actually. The Criterion release of it is absolutely wonderful. There is some terrific extras in it, including one that's a bit subtitling, which I think is one of the all-time great extras that I've ever seen, even though it's not very long. And come back and tell me what you think of the film, what else you see in the film that I have missed out, that maybe I've misinterpreted, because that's the whole joy and beauty of exploring cinema just like this. And I'll leave you with what will be next, which hopefully will not be as long as the previous part has been. And that is the Jacques Becker film, Edward and Caroline. We have looked at a film here where there's a femme fatale, where she manipulates the male to do what she wants in a way. And Edward and Caroline is about, well, it's a comedy, it's a French comedy about a husband and wife where they give each other as good as it gets. It's an absolutely terrific watch, I can tell you that right now. And if you want to get ahead of the curve, there's a Studio Canal release of it. If you can't find it anywhere else in the UK, you can catch up with it there. I'll look forward to speaking to you in the comments. Thanks very much for watching if you've made it this far, and take care, and I'll speak to you soon. All the best.